Welcome everyone to today's webinar. I'm Susan Hedstrom, the Executive Director for FPWR and the mom to Jaden, who's 12 years old with PWS. I will be your moderator today. 2021 is becoming a year for the record books for PWS. 2 completed phase 3 clinical trials are currently in discussions with the FDA and seeking approvals to treat hyperphagia and behavior. You may recall that in response to the FDA's position that an additional clinical trial would be needed for DCCR before an application could be submitted, FPWR and PWSA USA sent a letter to the FDA. This was back in April. The letter was signed on by over 26,000 of our supporters and requested that the FDA apply regulatory flexibility when reviewing any application for potential treatment for PWS. As a result, we were invited to join the FDA for a patient listening session. During this 1-hour meeting, Dr. Teresa Strong, Dr. Elizabeth Dykens, and Rob Lutz gave insight into PWS, its impact, our treatment priorities, and more. This meeting was not to advance any one product. Rather, it was to inform the FDA on the needs of the PWS community and support the review of any effective drug for PWS. On today's webinar, Teresa Strong and Paige Rivard will provide a summary of this meeting and its potential impact. As always, we want to hear from you. So if you have any questions during the webinar, please submit them through the Q&A and we will answer as many of your questions as possible. Teresa, let's hand it over to you to begin.
Thanks so much, Susan. And I'm really excited to be joined today by Paige to talk about this patient listening session that we had with the FDA. Yes, as Susan mentioned, PWSA, USA, and FPWR have a long history of working together to communicate the needs of the PWS community to the FDA. Over the years, we've provided some education about PWS. And for this particular listening session, it originated, as Susan mentioned, from a series of letters that we sent to the FDA this past fall, talking about the impact of COVID-19, the lockdown on our families and how that might impact clinical trials. And then, sending information about our community and how regulatory flexibility would be appropriate for the drugs that are in discussion with the FDA at this point. So what is a patient listening session? So these are small non-public meetings. So you may be familiar with, for example, patient-focused drug development meetings or FDA advisory committee meetings. Those are large meetings and the public is invited to present and everyone is sort of given an opportunity to speak. These meetings are different. They tend to be smaller and they tend to be more focused on specific questions. So it allows patient caregivers and their advocates to share disease-related experiences and perspective directly with FDA staff. They are not product specific, so nobody is allowed to talk about any specific drugs, but it does give an opportunity to present the needs of the PWS community and information that might be important as the FDA considers drugs for approval for PWS. The discussions are informal and non-binding. And so the format for this meeting was a 60-minute Zoom meeting. The lead review division was psychiatry. That is the division that is reviewing the majority of the drugs that are currently in clinical trials in PWS. And it was an opportunity for us really to focus on the PWS community perspective on issues that might impact regulatory decision making. So how the FDA is deciding whether or not to approve drugs. And we also really wanted to convey to the FDA the challenges that we face as a community in getting clinical trials accomplished. We are obviously a rare disease community, and we wanted to make sure the FDA appreciated the difficulties of doing clinical trials in PWS, and we wanted to discuss with them, if there were ways that, they could work with us to kind of, help move products forward in the challenging times that we have. So this was a really well-attended patient listening session. There were more than 60 FDA staff that participated in the Zoom meeting, which is a lot, and it was great to see. So whenever there's drugs that are reviewed by FDA, they're reviewed by a team. medical personnel, they have statisticians, they have someone who looks specifically at the clinical outcomes. And it was really good to see that all of these groups were really well represented. So they got to learn about PWS. And we did get really good feedback after the meeting that the information that we provided was very well received. In fact, the patient affairs staff asked if our meeting format could be used as a best practices for other patient groups that are engaging in patient listening sessions. So all of that was great. I'll show the agenda here. We covered a lot of territory. We knew that we had a lot to cover, and so we tried to stay really focused and really bring out those points that were most relevant to where we are now as a case. So, not as much because the FDA years now, so not as much basic information, but more about the specifics where we are now. So here's the agenda that we had. And we provided the FDA with a lot of supplemental information. So a PDF that included information that we have generated mainly through the PWS Clinical Trials Consortium, surveys that many of you have participated in about, what you would like to see treated in PWS, what kind of tolerance you have for risk in new drugs, and the burden of the disorder on the person with PWS and the families. So all of that information was provided to them in sort of one place so that they can go back to it as needed when they're reviewing any drug for PWS. And we also supplemented that with our personal stories, the stories that we've heard from you. So it was a combination of these qualitative stories about PWS to help them contextualize and understand the challenges our community has, and then some data, some data, more quantitative data. And FDA is interested in that because although they listen and appreciate the stories and it gives them an understanding, they also want to know about the entire population. So do individual stories reflect what the majority of individuals in a population experience? Are there subsets of individuals who have different needs than others? They want to know all that as they're considering a new drug for PWS. So that combination of qualitative and quantitative information, I think, is important to them. So we started by talking about PWS, and we really emphasized that it's a very complex neurodevelopmental disorder and has metabolic aspects too. So we don't want the FDA to think about this the same way that they think about, for example, simple obesity in the general population. And we talked about the many clinical symptoms, but of course we emphasize that change in appetite, which is really unique to PWS, where babies start with difficulties feeding, and then they progress to where they're really focused on food and have hyperphagia or excessive appetite. We also talked about the challenging behavioral profile that our kids have, and that it may be food related, but there are also non-food related issues with anxiety and with rigidity and temper outbursts. And we discussed the profound impacts that it has on daily living and quality of life for the person with PWS, that they need 24/7 supervision, that as they get older, even though they may have the intellectual capacity to do things independently, the food restrictions and the behavioral challenges makes it much difficult for them to have independence. And how their life is limited in many cases. I know many of you, you avoid family gatherings, you avoid social situations because the issues around food and behavior become so challenging. And the fact that it impacts the entire family. When the FDA considers drugs, they use this benefit risk framework. And so this is where the patient community can help them contextualize information and sort of influence how they think about this benefit risk framework. So they think about the condition, they think about the current treatment options, and we really emphasize that our treatment options are very limited in PWS. They think about the potential benefit for a new drug and the potential risks and how those things weigh out. So one of the things that we were really trying to convey was that when we think about that benefit risk, when we think about the risk of a new drug, as if we have no risk now and then a new drug would have some risk. In fact, we live with risk every day. And so we tried to emphasize that, despite the fact that many families are getting an earlier diagnosis, they're getting education, it is still a struggle to keep a person with PWS at a healthy weight, especially as they grow older. And, we have the data from our natural history study that many of you are participating in, that about a quarter of adults in the Path for PWS study have a BMI of over 40. So that's significantly overweight, significantly obese, and, would be expected to have significant health consequences. So many families are still struggling with obesity. And even for those individuals who are, of a healthy weight, that doesn't mean that they don't have the drive to eat and that they're not at risk for, stomach rupture if they overeat, running away to try to get food, or getting into bad situations to try to get food. So we shared all that with them. We also shared the fact that families are really struggling to manage behaviors, that a high percent, again, we had the data from the Path for PWS study, a very high percent of individuals are taking psychiatric drugs, and those drugs have never been tested systematically in PWS. So our families are already trying to manage behaviors to some degree with the use of drugs that have significant effects and are not well studied in PWS. So because of that, we convey that caregivers in the PWS community are accepting of a certain level of risk. And many of you participated in a study by John Bridges' group about 2 years ago, which has just been accepted for publication, and we shared the publication with the FDA, that even for a modest improvement in hyperphagia, you would be willing to accept some risk in a new treatment. And that's a really important thing for them to understand. The other thing we wanted to convey is that families are willing to accept some uncertainty of benefit. So, we all want to make sure a drug is safe and effective before it's approved. But I guess the question that the FDA needs to, consider is what level of certainty. And what we tried to convey based on what we heard from the community is that the community is willing to accept some uncertainty if if the bulk of the data shows that there is the potential for benefit. So families would like to try a drug working with their doctor and have that opportunity, particularly if the safety profile of the drug is good. So the takeaways from this first part, and then I'll turn it over to Paige to talk about the next section, is that PWS is a life-threatening disorder with high unmet medical needs, and it's a rare disease. And those definitions are important for the FDA because that allows them to use a little bit more flexibility in considering treatments for the disorder. And nothing works for the most difficult symptoms. We also conveyed that PWS is extremely complex. So in these, some of the studies that we've done, families have identified hyperphagia, anxiety, and temper outbursts as the 3 sort of highest ranking things to treat. But we wanted to make sure that the FDA understood that, the treatment priorities change over time and they vary between families. So parents of little ones, are really focused on, the feeding, like difficulties feeding, that the babies aren't feeding well. And, other families, skin picking is a huge problem, or sleep issues. So we wanted to make sure that the FDA took away that this is a very complex disorder, and that we believe there will be, several treatments that will be needed in order to manage it effectively and make life better for individuals with PWS. Our tolerance for risk is high. And families would welcome drugs that have been tested in the PWS population so that they and their doctor can work together and have a reasonable understanding of risk and benefit and move forward with that decision making. So I will turn it over to Paige now, who will talk about the next things that we covered.
Thank you, Teresa. So this next portion of the meeting really focused on the individuals with PWS. Dr. Elizabeth Dykins and Elizabeth Roof conducted a study which actually started with a suggestion from the FDA to gain a better perspective from individuals with PWS. They wanted to better understand how individuals with PWS viewed themselves and future clinical trials. So this study had 21 participants that they recruited that they thought had the ability to respond to the interview questions. The interview questions asked, how does Prader-Willi syndrome affect you in your everyday life? And what are your ideas about new medications for PWS, clinical trials, and how they might impact you? The interviews were recorded and analyzed, and key findings emerged. It was interesting, there were 6 female participants who could not respond to the questions. And a side note, these individuals did not differ from those who could respond in their age, genetic subtype, or IQ. So therefore, it is important to note not all individuals with PWS can self-report. But in clinical trials, individuals with PWS should be encouraged to share their thoughts with their parents, caregivers, and clinicians. However, it is a bit risky to assume that all individuals with PWS can provide meaningful data. Another key finding was what PWS meant to them. They stated that they struggled with hunger, food, and eating. They also mentioned they struggled with anxiety, stress, and outbursts, very similar to what caregivers reported. Those outbursts were related to schedule changes, being denied food, and school even came up. Another finding was around views of new medications. They all wanted new medications for hunger, anxiety, and outbursts, and the ability to meet their life goals. They all also wanted to participate in clinical trials, and they felt these new medications would have a positive effect on their family relationships and ability to pursue their goals. Less stress at home, and may even mean they could live in an apartment or do things that they can't do today. This slide just really provides you a few quotes from individuals with PWS and reminds us that hyperphagia is a meaningful endpoint in clinical trials. Next slide. Next, the FDA was interested in hearing what we might consider a meaningful impact, and how would we view those changes with new treatments. So Rob Lutz, who's a board member for PWSA, shared his story about his 21-year-old daughter, Isabel, and his view on potential treatments and impacts that might have on her life and his family's life. Rob shared that his daughter has a caregiver overseeing her every day. This caregiver helps control access to food and also assists in managing behavior issues. He talked about how she has no money of her own, and if she did, she would find ways to sneak food. He shared the passion his daughter has for horses and her desire to become a vet tech. However, individuals with PWS often cannot pursue their passions fully due to food and behavior issues. Rob shared he realized that new treatments will not be a cure, but an opportunity for Isabel and others with PWS to live a better and more fulfilling life. This is a good segue into the final topic we covered in the meeting, which was ongoing trials and challenges that we see in trying to demonstrate efficacy and safety in PWS. So I will turn it back over to Teresa.
Thank you, Paige. Yeah, we had shared with the FDA some data that many of you participated in, a survey in a global PWS registry about how the lockdown, COVID lockdown, impacted you and your families. And we made the point that, it was different for different families. And so it was unpredictable. And, we expect that the impact would have impacted also the ongoing clinical trials. That was the main point that we were trying to get across. And we also expressed concern about, we hope we're coming out of the COVID pandemic, but obviously there's going to be some bumps along the way. So clinical trials that are, ongoing now and about to be started may face some challenges as well. we also talked, what we don't want the FDA to do is just say, okay, you have X number of people, you should be able to do all of these clinical trials. What we wanted to convey was how difficult it is for families to actually participate in these clinical trials. And the sponsoring companies, I think, have really tried to, work with our community and try to make these trials as feasible as possible. But there are still, issues with traveling to a site, spending the day, getting tested. Travel can be difficult for families. Families, they're working sometimes, they have other siblings. So participating in these clinical trials is really difficult. And then, with any clinical trial, there are exclusion criteria. Companies oftentimes want an HQ-CT score of a certain level so that they can see when hyperphagia decreases, and that's a reasonable thing for them to want in their clinical trials. There may be medications that exclude us. Anyway, to get across to the FDA is that there are a lot of challenges with getting these clinical trials done. So we'd like to think creatively with them on ways that we can help reduce the burden on families. Is there existing data that we can use to supplement? The FDA likes to have, substantial evidence, they call it, of efficacy of a drug. So can we use existing data, for example, from the PATH for PWS study, the natural history study, the NIH-funded natural history study that took place a few years ago that some of you may have participated in. Time was getting short, but I think this is a conversation that will continue. We in follow-up, we hope directly about the use of the PATH for PWS study to supplement some of the existing studies, and the FDA, actually suggested that. So we'll look forward to that. But I think it's going to be an ongoing process of really trying to make sure that all of these clinical trials get done and get done efficiently. And, there'll be more about how to do that. So I think, Paige, you were going to talk about next steps.
Sure. So what are the next steps? For PWSA and FPWR, we will be sharing a written summary report of this FDA patient listening session early next week sometime. So you will see that coming out. We obviously will continue to meet with the pharmaceutical companies on a regular basis and assist where we can. And our organizations will provide a platform to gather the voice of the PWS community. And we will just continue to share information as early and often as we can. All the communication, that we've been doing with the FDA, the letters, including the FDA advisory committee meetings, and other information that we can share, we will share with you in real time. So what can you do as a community? Make sure you're participating in the global PWS registry. That's very important to gather data on our community. Continue to learn about the ongoing trials and consider participating in them if you can. And then continue just to raise awareness about PWS wherever and whenever you can. The next slide will have a few resources for you as well. And thank you very much for your time today. I hope this was helpful in understanding, a little bit more about what the patient listening session was about. And I think that we have some time for questions, I believe.
Thank you so much, Paige and Teresa, for giving that summary of the meeting. We are open for questions. So if people would like to ask their questions, they can enter them into the Q&A. And we will field those questions as they come in. So the first question that we have here, will there be additional listening sessions in the future?
I think, if there's new information to be provided to the FDA, there would potentially be new listening sessions, but they really, we've had this one and they're not really open to having multiple listening sessions just for having sessions. But Teresa, do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the listening sessions in particular are based on the needs of the FDA in many cases. So do they feel the need to gain more, gather more information? And so, if as you say, Paige, if something new came up that they wanted to specifically learn about, I think that would be a possibility. But, they're reviewing hundreds of disorders and drugs, and so they do tend to be sort of selective in how often they have that kind of a meeting. There are many different kinds of meetings that the FDA has to interact with patients. The patient listening session is just one kind. So there's possibilities of other kinds of meetings. And if any of these drugs move to a point where the FDA is sort of publicly showing that they're reviewing an application and thinking about it, the FDA has the option of doing a advisory committee, and that would be an opportunity. That's again a public meeting, and people would be able, and that is product specific, so people would be able to talk about how a specific drug impacted them and give their perspective. And that's it's a big public whoop-de-doo thing.
Thank you so much. We have a couple of questions, very similar in nature, regarding timelines. So when might the FDA provide feedback on this meeting, and what could we expect from future communication from the FDA?
So I can take the first part of that. They really didn't give us an indication of any feedback. We will provide the notes from this meeting, and that is really where we left it. They don't provide any update from this particular meeting.
I mean, we are following up about the question of, using natural history data to support product development. But, the conversations between the FDA and companies by law is, completely confidential. They can't talk about that with us. So it's essentially up to the companies to, share with the community. And I know the companies in many cases, they're very anxious to share information with the communities. They want the community to know what's going on, and but they have to balance all of their needs, and so it's kind of up to them to make those communications. So yeah, I think there's opportunities for follow-up if one of these drugs has an application. There's the potential for an advisory committee meeting sometime down the line.
Mm-hmm. So this question is addressed to you. How did you feel that it went? Did you feel that the FDA was receptive?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think that the the psychiatry division, as I said, has for a number of years heard about PWS. I think they have had an opportunity to it's a difficult disorder to understand, but I think definitely they would like to see a treatment go forward if they feel comfortable that it is an effective treatment, that it's a safe treatment. So I don't think there's a barrier there as far as them understanding. In fact, I would say that one of the FDA leadership said something along the lines of, it is unacceptable that we don't have a treatment to help individuals with PWS. So they really want to see a treatment go forward. Their concern is they want to make sure that this is an effective treatment, because they don't want something out there, that families are trying and potentially incurring risk if they don't feel comfortable that it's effective. So I would say that, my feeling, and I think Paige, it'd be great to get your thoughts too, is that they really appreciated the information. They really want to understand the community, and that they do, they do have an understanding of some of the challenges that we face.
Yeah, Teresa, I would agree. I mean, I think, as you mentioned earlier, we had such a great turnout. There were so many people there, and it seemed that they were very well versed in PWS and understood, things from hyperphagia to anxiety. They really understood what we were going through, and I feel like they are, wanting, as you said, they want to see something happen that will benefit our community.
So recently the FDA approved a new Alzheimer's drug. Are there any takeaways from that recent approval, and does it indicate a willingness to consider patient perspective?
Yeah, I don't know what the takeaway is on that because there's such controversy around it, right? So for those of you who are not keeping up, there was a drug approved, I think it was from Biogen, for Alzheimer's. The efficacy was not as strong as I think everybody would have liked, but there was, the patients really, felt like it might be able to help, and the drug was approved. Now there's all kinds of pushback. I saw this morning, I think Congress is setting up a committee to investigate. So I don't, on the one hand, it's encouraging that the FDA was taking strongly into account the patient perspective. On the other hand, will there be pushback that would affect, any PWS or other drugs? I don't know. So yeah, I'm not sure. I don't think anyone's sure.
We are pushing up on our half hour, so I'm going to just take one more question for you. I think this is a great summary to the presentation. What else can we as parents do to help without getting in the way of progress?
That's a great question. And I think, yeah, back to the next steps, I think as parents, as we all are parents, we, make sure you're in the registry, make sure you're signed up and answering those questions and participating. And I think educating yourselves on the clinical trials, knowing what's out there, what's coming up, and then deciding, as a family, can you participate? And then just continue to advocate where you can, when you can. And, we are all in this together as a community. We all want to see the same results. We all want treatments that are going to help our loved ones with PWS.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, there's lots of opportunities to advocate across the community, take advantage of those. And if you can participate in clinical trials, I mean, we are a very exciting time in our community where there are several potential new treatments for PWS, but we are never going to see those come to fruition if people aren't participating in clinical trials and getting those evaluated. So obviously that is a decision that you make with your family, with your physician, and it's a personal decision. But I guess it just really is on us if we want new treatments to participate in these clinical trials and get them done.
Fantastic. We'd really like to thank all of you for joining us today. It's wonderful to have so many people engaged in our community. Staying active in this clinical trial journey is so incredibly important. So again, thank you all for joining us. This webinar has been recorded and will be shared shortly with the community. Have a wonderful rest of your day.